You've been doing Stoicism wrong, and the version you've been doing is actually making you weaker, not more resilient, not calmer, just numb. There's a version of Stoicism circulating on the internet right now that basically tells you, don't feel things, push it down, stay stone-faced, move on. And millions of people have latched onto that idea because, honestly, it sounds like strength. It sounds like something Marcus Aurelius would say. But Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, one of the most pressure-tested leaders in human history, never said that. If this is you, if you've been using being stoic as an excuse to bottle things up and call it discipline, stay right here. Because what you've built isn't resilience. It's a dam. And dams crack. Subscribe if you want to hear things that actually hold up when the pressure gets real. Now, here's what most people get wrong from the very beginning. They hear the word stoic and picture a man who feels nothing. And that's where the whole thing collapses. Stoicism, the actual philosophy, developed by Zeno of Citium in Athens around 300 BC, was never about the absence of emotion. It was about the relationship to emotion.
That's a completely different thing. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who started life as a literal slave and became one of the most quoted thinkers in history, said something that cuts right through the confusion. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." Read that again. He didn't say, don't feel it. He said, understand where the feeling is coming from. That's not suppression. That's surgery.
But here's where it gets worse. And this next part is what explains why the watered-down version is so popular. Suppressing emotion is easy to perform. You look stoic. You seem in control. People around you think you figured something out. And for a while, it works as a social strategy. But Dr. James Pennebaker, a social psychologist at the University of Texas, spent decades studying what happens when people suppress emotional processing. The findings were not ambiguous. People who bottle emotional experiences showed elevated heart rate, higher cortisol levels, and weakened immune function. That's your body fighting the very thing you think you're mastering. You're not above the emotion. You're just paying for it differently. Now, let me show you what the real thing looks like. The Stoics had a concept called the dichotomy of control. It is genuinely one of the most useful mental frameworks ever written down. The idea is simple. There are things within your control and things outside it. Your opinions, your choices, your responses, your effort. Those are yours. The weather, other people's behavior, the economy, what happened yesterday, what someone thinks of you. Those are not yours. And the Stoics weren't saying ignore the second list. They were saying stop suffering over the second list as if it's the first list. This is where the resilience actually lives. Not in pretending you don't feel loss when someone betrays you, but in recognizing that their behavior was never yours to control, and your response is. That distinction is everything. Here's something I don't say enough. The people who've been using Stoicism to avoid feeling things aren't weak. They found something that seemed to protect them, and for a while it did. But there's a point where a coping mechanism becomes a cage. And the next part is the part that explains why real Stoicism is actually harder than suppression. Marcus Aurelius, in his private journal, the one he never intended anyone to read, the one we now call Meditations, wrote about grief, about frustration, about the weight of making decisions that cost people's lives. He didn't perform peace. He practiced returning to it every day. There's a Stoic exercise called negative visualization, premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. You deliberately imagine losing the things you value, a job, a relationship, your health, not to torture yourself, but so that when difficulty actually arrives, you aren't blindsided. You've already made peace with the fragility of the good things in your life. That's not emotional suppression. That's emotional preparation. There's a profound difference.
Pause on this for a second, because what we're really talking about is how you've defined strength. If your definition of strength is not being affected, then you're trying to become inhuman, and you'll never win that fight because you're not built for it. But if your definition of strength is being affected and remaining functional, that's trainable. That's what Viktor Frankl, Austrian psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, and author of Man's Search for Meaning, was describing when he wrote that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. He didn't survive Auschwitz by feeling nothing. He survived by finding meaning inside the suffering. That is Stoicism in its most complete form, not stone, rooted.
So here's where you actually have to be honest with yourself. When you say you're being stoic about something, are you processing it with clarity, or are you just not dealing with it? Because those two things look the same from the outside, they feel completely different 5 years from now. The man who genuinely applied the dichotomy of control in a painful situation is freer. The man who just buried it is still carrying it. It's just in a different pocket.
Real Stoicism asks something of you that emotional suppression never does. It asks you to stay present with the discomfort long enough to sort it. Is this within my control? If yes, what is my best response? If no, why am I spending myself on this? That's the whole practice. Not 3 steps, not a morning routine. One honest question, applied consistently until it becomes reflex. Most people find the suppression version of Stoicism because they're in pain and they need something to hold on to. The cold, hard, unfeeling version feels like armor, but armor that can't bend gets shattered. The actual philosophy gives you something better than armor. It gives you a center, a place to return to, and you can only return to something you've actually built. So here's the question I'm leaving you with. The emotion you've been calling weakness. What if it's not the problem? What if the problem is that you haven't learned to sit with it long enough to hear what it's telling you? The Stoics didn't fear emotion. They feared being controlled by it. That's a different war entirely. And until you know which one you're actually fighting, the philosophy won't help you. If this landed somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because there's more of this coming.